I've got two introductions, a double introduction. The first one is this. Yesterday we had a wedding here, and afterwards we went to a beautiful reception, and at the reception there were many speeches. Thankfully they were all good. They were terrific, and we didn't have any stupid telegrams. That's the bit I hate, those ones. But what was spoken about was, a number of times people talked about the ups and downs of life, because there are ups and downs in life. Obviously, if you're going to talk about a couple getting married, and in the previous year they had two parents die, the COVID era, and then difficulties getting married, obviously you're going to talk about ups and downs in life. The other thing that was funny was that he, at the age of 25, met her when she was 15, and she was smitten with him, but obviously the difference, no, not going to happen. And it wasn't until she was 30 that they met again, at which point 10 years is okay. So they've had ups and downs, and I know enough about you to know you've had ups and downs. And so people talk about the ups and downs of life. The question is, which are the good parts, the ups or the downs? And the obvious answer, you might think, is the ups. What sort of understanding of life says that the ups are the only good parts, when we know that it says about Christ that though he was equal with God, that's pretty up, he did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped. That is, he did not hold on to the up and say nothing but up, but he emptied himself and was found in human likeness, down. And then he humbled himself to death, down. And as we said in the Creed, down again after his death. And then it says, now this is really important. Sometimes people say about Jesus that death could not hold him. That is, that it was a farcical going down, because it didn't mean anything, because he always knew he was going to go up. But it importantly says about him, and this is from Philippians chapter 2, it importantly says, therefore, because he went down, 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 therefore God raised him and appointed him to the highest place. Sounds like they're having a disco. I'll talk louder. Therefore God raised him and appointed him to the highest place. He was raised up with God because he was humble and humbled himself and was obedient. And we know, because of the night before he died, that he was not thinking, well, that's all right, I'm going to get lifted anyhow. It says that he was justified for his obedience. Now, the point about that is, Jesus Christ is not only the Word of God who created all things, but he is the Redeemer of all things, and he is the most accomplished of all things, and he is lauded or praised more than all. Therefore, we have to consider our way of thinking if we believe that the downs are the bad parts and the ups are the good parts. The second reason why we need to think about this carefully is this. You and I have observed in other people's lives, and perhaps in our own, certainly in mine, that if we're guided by feelings only, we become spiritually impoverished. If we believe that the only feelings that are good are the good feelings, we become spiritually impoverished, because we flee from the bad feelings and pursue the good ones. And you can think of all the ways that that takes place, most especially in this one, in this story, the good feeling of being desired and loved by someone who is not your wife, but is the wife of someone else. That is, how many times have you observed, have I observed, the absolute catastrophe that proceeds from adultery? Pursuing the good feeling. That's one introduction. The second one is this, and you need the passage in front of you. Verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Take that as a snapshot. Just walk into Joseph's life with your camera, with your reporter's card, and observe. The Lord was with him, first of all. And he prospered. And other people saw that God was with him. The repetition of the Lord 3 times. You want to know about this man's life? Lord, Lord, Lord. It's a godly life and it's a prosperous life. Then go to verse 21. The Lord was with him, Joseph, and the Lord showed him kindness and granted him favour in the eyes of the prison warden. So leave out the prison warden bit because we're taking a snapshot, leaving out the other things around it. We are the 2 bookends of this story are saying this is a man who had God in his life. People observed that God was in his life. He had a prosperous life. He's a pin-up for good feelings, yeah? And yet we know the story. It's a story of 2 garments. So last week we talked about his father had anointed him and appointed him as the one who would take care as administrator and leader of the family. And the proof was he had the flash coat. I don't even know what good coats are called, but he had a really flash coat, really high brand coat. The next time we know, and it was taken from him as an act of betrayal, and nothing good came of it, especially for him. So his coat is taken from him and he finds himself in a pit, sold as a slave. The next time we hear about a coat, he's got an administrator's coat. He's been anointed and appointed to take care of all things. And again, through betrayal, the coat is taken from him and he's betrayed. So which is the true story about the status of this man? What is the truth about Joseph's life? Is he prospering under the fact that the Lord is with him? Or is he a man who's betrayed and has everything, his status taken from him? Well, the important thing is that both things must be true. Let's take that snapshot and observe the betrayal beside it and the taking away of the things that he did so well. Both his status and the thing that made him feel good about himself and that other people observed were taken from him. But no one could take away the presence of God in his life. Now, the reason why this is important is because, speaking of what you and I have observed and seen in people, you and I know that nothing is more likely to make a person bitter towards others, bitter about their own life, and therefore often bitter towards God, even the God they'll tell you they no longer believe in, than adverse circumstances, betrayal, and losing their raison d'etre, their reason for being. True? And so this story is not just a morality tale, much more important than that. We talked about the fact that what is happening here is what we call the seed project. And for those who are hearing it for the first time, just let me quickly go through that. In the garden, there is perfection, then there's rebellion. It's called sin. It leads to shame. It leads from distancing from God. Eventually, there's this pattern of sin, God's grace, sin and God's grace. And then one person is called out, Abraham, and he's told, your seed will be a blessing to the nations. And then we find out which seed, because we've got the Ishmaelites come about because of his seed. The Ishmaelites are the one who sold Joseph into slavery. Which seed? And the answer is, well, the seed of the covenant, the promise that God makes. And that's passed on to Abraham. That's from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, who is Joseph's father. And then Jacob is a bit of a reprobate with regard to seed. There's too much seed. And all the difficulties that happen amongst these people is because there's too much seed. And so, importantly, What does not happen in this story? There is no malignant seed. Isn't that important in terms of the seed project? I'm not going to lay with you. I will not. There's other patterns that you'll observe here. But how is the seed project, the promise of God, going to be fulfilled unless it happens in the life of someone who could choose blaming? Remember when Adam and Eve fell, what happened there? Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the serpent. They blamed. Joseph does not blame. Joseph turns to God. How else will there be the promise to Abraham and his seed fulfilled unless we have someone who has learned, I serve God and I forgive? If he hasn't learnt forgiveness in the harshest of circumstances, he won't forgive his brothers at the end of the story when they come to Egypt seeking help. And the story finishes. God has prepared a man, Joseph. And the way that Joseph, without his even knowing it, pursues the purpose of God is that when he's thrown into a pit or thrown into a prison, when his garments are taken from him, when it seems that everything's gone, he still serves God and God still prospers him. So the extraordinary possibility is that the height of his blessing was at the depth of his imprisonment. What about that for a thought? The other thing is, when the promise to Abraham is given that through you the nations will be blessed, we tend to think, oh yes, that will be when Jesus comes and all the nations come to believe in Jesus. We don't have to wait that long. We just look at the life of Joseph. Because he learnt faithfulness in all the difficulties of being appointed by his father to be a great steward, and because he learned in Potiphar's house how to be a great steward, and because he learned again in the prison how to be a great steward, he becomes such a great steward that Egypt, that godless place of many gods, is blessed. And not only Egypt, but at that time, all the nations around Egypt, because it wasn't just the Hebrews who came for help. People came from all over that part of the world during the famine to be spared and saved. And how did that happen? Because God had anointed and appointed Joseph. True? Amen. The promise to be a blessing to the nations is already fulfilled in this man. Now, this is very important. How are people to be a blessing to God? They must understand how they are blessed by God. If you believe that to have a lot of things, a flash coat and lots of power and influence are the ways that you are blessed by God, how will you bless others? But if you believe that to serve God and to say, though the fig tree does not blossom and there be no fruit on the vine, yet will I rejoice in the Lord, I'll rejoice in the God of my salvation. If you can't say that, you can't be a blessing. There's a fellow I know who owns a Bentley. Man, is it a flash car. And a really big boat. He's a lovely fellow. But how can he bless people? By letting him drive his Bentley. And I guarantee the insurance doesn't allow you to drive his Bentley, Josh. And he's not going to let you take his boat. Circumstances get read. We read circumstances. And so that's why this story is here, in part. Although I said it's not a morality tale, it is an important story to have application to us. And there are two ways that that is done. You might like to look these passages up later. There are two ways that we see that God is working in this man Joseph for our sake in fulfilment of God's purposes. One of them is that Jesus comes and tells us you cannot be prosperous if you serve two masters, because you love one and you hate the other. You can't love both God and mammon. Mammon not only being money, but the desire to find your fulfilment in stuff. You can't do that. Well, Jesus taught that, and Joseph knows it. Already, Joseph knows it. And so, importantly, in Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 to 24, those of you who take notes and look up for fun, put that down. Colossians 3, 23 to 24. Go and read that and see what happens there. But the other thing is this. We know absolutely in our own lives the turmoil of false accusation. And we live in the era of false accusation. The Bible teaches emphatically that if someone has offended you, you go and see that person and you sort out the problem. And it's only if there's been no resolution there that you appeal to another party, and the other party you appeal to is not the adjudicator. They're the person who comes in and still tries to seek reconciliation. True? And it's only at the third attempt, if it doesn't work, that you go to adjudication. But in the era we live in, where to be victimised is to be empowered, the first thing we do is what Potiphar's wife did, and that is accuse. Not all accusations are false. They're not. But if you've ever been falsely accused, you'll know that Joseph also has to undergo false accusation and persevere in the blessing of God, for that is exactly the heart of what happens to Jesus. That's exactly what he does. And the reason he does it is so that, and here's the harsh part, I'll pick on you, Josh, because we love each other. This is why it's so important, because how else can the Lord Jesus Christ accuse you of your rebellion against him unless he is absolutely squeaky clean? Yeah? Unless he has gone through false accusation, and as it says in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 20 to 23, unless we are able to say, I will not retaliate, I will not self-justify, I'll put my hands in the hands of God, can we make judgment? And so forgiveness, accusation and judgment are safely in the hands of Jesus, just as they're safely in the hands of Joseph. The finest judges. He becomes the steward of all, whereas he says in this story, everything in this house belongs to me, except you, Potiphar. Then too, when he comes to be steward for Pharaoh, everything in Egypt belongs to me. It's all mine. And I now can judge because I am a person who has been falsely judged, and yet without blame, nor false accusation, nor self-seeking. Isn't that a powerful story? It's wonderful. And that's one of the other reasons why Joseph. Now, there are applications to this, aren't there? Don't make false accusations against people, will you? Secondly, if you're accused, don't fight back and go and don't triangulate things. It's bad enough. Don't do that. That's not a good way to go. But the reason why it's not a good way to go is not because it's virtuous not to. It's because that's the way that God redeems. And we participate with him in that. If someone's stolen your cloak, ask yourself, what is my reason for being? How am I justified? What is my purpose? How do I know if God's blessing me? Because if it's whether I'm wearing the coat or not, I'm in trouble. Continue. Why this story? Well, the seed project. Now, importantly, in chapter 38, we start reading the story of Joseph, and then we get to chapter 38, and we don't hear about Joseph anymore. We hear about his brother Judah. And his brother Judah has certain responsibilities to his daughter-in-law Tamar. Tamar has a husband who dies, another one who dies. Judah is supposed to be her redeemer. That's the word. He's supposed to redeem her, and he won't do it. And he won't do it because he believes that she's cursed, and if I give another son to her, I'll lose another son. Therefore, I won't do what's right because I want what's going to be best for me. And he mucks around with his responsibilities in redemption calling, and he abuses her. Then she pretends to be a prostitute. He, though he has very strict rules about what's best for him, doesn't have many rules about what's best for others, sleeps with her, she becomes pregnant. Him in his moral outrage says, I'm going to kill her. We're going to burn this woman. And then he finds out that she knows who the father is, and he has a mea culpa. But the point of the story is it is a powerful contrast, and it's meant to be, to what happens next, where God's hand is upon Joseph. Even Potiphar sees God's hand is upon him. It's a recreation of the original temptation. You know, you see that he says, everything here is mine. Was that not true of Adam and Eve? Did God not say, everything here is yours? Without shame, without embarrassment, in full relationship with me. Everything is open. Except this tree, because this tree, if you eat the fruit, you will know good and evil. You will enter into a place where you've become like God, but it's not God being jealous of being God. It's you will not be able to negotiate how to be in an open relationship with God. Because you'll start thinking good and evil. You'll start thinking, oh, do I hide at this point? And if I hide, do I tell a lie? If I stay away from God and tell enough lies and seek my own benefit, will I be able to manipulate things around me so that they will turn good? And the whole story about Judah and Tamar is that. Judah had learned the knowledge of good and evil. In this second temptation that takes place with Joseph, he says, I'm in this garden where I've prospered and God's with me. Everything here, Potiphar's wife, it's interesting we don't know her name, everything here, Potiphar's wife, is mine, except you. And most importantly, he says, I cannot sin against God by doing this. So by betraying your husband, who I can't betray, can't sin against God. Good for him. Not only that, he had a good strategy. It says that he wouldn't be with her. So if he knew where she was, he wasn't there. He had a good practical plan. However, on one particular day, there are no servants there. He comes in, didn't know she was there. She grabs his garment. You know the rest of the story. He flees, which I imagine is why Paul says to young people, flee youthful passion. Just run. But he's falsely accused, and the story goes, Potiphar comes back and he's so angry that he sends him to prison. Now here's an interesting thing. In my research I discovered that on the whole, this is the Egyptian Middle Kingdom, they didn't have prisons. You know why they didn't have prisons? They just knocked them on the head. They didn't need prisons because you don't need prisons for dead people. So there is an act of grace here. He's been spared. You might think, oh, how have I been spared? I'm in a prison. But the answer is verse 21. God has never stopped being with Joseph. He's never left him. He's never betrayed him. But he has anointed and appointed him. And he will need to learn to be a blessing to nations, to put God first, to forgive. God appoints redeemers. And redeemers, as we know from Christ, have a longing for the kingdom of justice. And they have learned to long for the kingdom of justice because they've had laid upon them injustice. Is not the story of Joseph the story of Jesus? But importantly, the story of Joseph points to Jesus, but it is an echo of Jesus. That's really important. It's not that God is working out ways of bringing about redemption and he tries something with Joseph and thinks, well, that was good. We'll have forgiveness and false accusation and seeking me first and being set free from feelings. I might try that a few more times and see what happens. And 2,000 years later, figures, I've got it sorted now. We'll do Jesus. On the other hand, Joseph is the echo. So that you and I now are able to read the book of Genesis and think, this is much more useful to me than browsing through the Sydney Morning Herald. This story. It's got much more application. I learn a lot more about how to live my life. I learn a lot more about my feelings than reading psychology books. A lot more about wellness by reading this story. Because not only do I see God at work, but I get thrust into asking, all right then, if these things are true, life has its ups and downs. Are the downs the bad parts? For if God is with me, who can be against me? And if God has promised to bless me, who can curse me? No, Paul says, we are more than conquerors through Christ. Amen? Come on. Just a little preach it, brother. Amen? Amen. Amen. So the big issue here in this story is not be like Joseph, it's throw yourself upon God.
Friends, by way of reflection, I'd love to read out this hymn to you. This is a hymn that, during the height of my anxiety in Year 12, we sung at church, and it's something that I instantly copied down onto my phone, and I've been carrying it around in a Google Note. So friends, let me read this out to you, and let's reflect on it together. Father, although I cannot see the future you have planned, and though the path is sometimes dark and hard to understand, yet give me faith through joy and pain to trace your loving hand. When I recall that in the past your promises have stood through each perplexing circumstance and every changing mood, I rest content that all things work together for my good. Whatever then the future brings of good or seeming ill, I'll ask for strength to follow you and grace to trust you still, and I would look for no reward except to do your will.